record, and then do share screen and do this. Okay, we're on a roll now. Florence, do you know if anybody else is going to join us today?
I think Tabo is going to join us.
Daniel?
Tabo.
Tabo, okay.
Yes.
I will wait a couple more minutes to see if they're able to join us. What we're here we go. All right. If I'm sharing the screen, I can't see that there are people waiting to join. So I will keep it up this way for a couple of minutes.
All right.
I'll wait until they're joined in and then we'll get started.
I'm not sure about Daniel.
Okay.
Because he has been unwell, and currently I'm away. I'm not home. I'm in Lusaka.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
We normally share the phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm waiting for Stephen. This has been a long, difficult week. They're checking my cancer again, so we're hoping that my cancer has not come back. I like to think of cancer as the gift that keeps on giving. Okay, today is the last day of us doing lifespan development. Next week, Bonnie will be back doing healthy living and stress and relaxation. And there'll be 2 videos put up about stress management and relaxation as well as her PowerPoint. There's a lot of noise in someone's place.
Yes, maybe Stephen's place.
Okay. So what we could do is I will mute. I'm going to mute. I will mute the background ones because that makes it easier. But if people have questions, just put your hand up and wave and I'll quickly unmute you because I should be able to see all 4 of you on the side. So what we're going to do is, okay, here we go. And every so often, if I have to keep this screen down because that tells me if there's more participants coming. So every so often I'll check to see if there's more people. As I said, we're trying to finish off lifespan today. Okay, what is going on? Okay. So one of the things we wanted to talk about was prenatal development. And one of the reasons we're looking at prenatal development is we often forget is the things that are happening while you're pregnant can also end up affecting your whole life. So the first part of development is the first 2 weeks, and that's just called the germinal stage, and there's a zygote. And at that stage, there are only 200 cells. And one of the things that's good about that is at that stage, most women don't know they're pregnant yet. So anything you take in those first 2 weeks, if you drink or something, it's not going to affect the baby because the baby hasn't attached itself to the uterus yet, so nothing the mother takes in can harm it. And one of the things we know is, surprisingly enough, about 10 to 40% of zygotes don't make it to implantation. So about 10 to 40% of fertilizations never actually grow to be a baby. Whoops. What have I done here? Shoot, I'm gonna have to go back. I have to stop share because I've messed this up. PowerPoint. Okay. Where did the Zoom go? All right, so we'll go back and try this again. So As I said, 10 to 40% of those zygotes don't live. So a lot of women don't even know they're pregnant and they lose it. But after 2 weeks, it attaches to the uterus, and that now means that anything the mother is doing can permanently affect the baby. And one of the most important things that is starting to form in those first 3 to 9 weeks is what we call the neural tube, and that's the part that becomes the brain and the spinal cord. And then that's why things like folic acid is really important, because otherwise we get brain malformations and spinal cord malformations. We also know that women with diabetes need to make sure their diabetes is controlled, because too much insulin can affect the brain development, believe it or not, and taking an anticonvulsant. So we want to make sure that we've got good folic acid and zinc supplements. One of the other things that's interesting, between implantation and birth, about 1/3 of pregnancies are lost. And again, most of that happens in the first 2 months or 3 months. So again, until recently, a lot of women wouldn't even know they were pregnant in those first month or two. So this just shows you some of the things you can eat for sources of zinc to make sure that the brain grows properly, and for sources of folic acid. And it's really important, because if your brain doesn't grow properly when you're in the uterus, it's not going to grow properly when you're born. And as I said, most of the losses that we see in pregnancy, the first one is poor implantation. The next one, first trimester, it's to early second trimester. It's usually because there's something wrong with the fetus. So you have a miscarriage because the fetus isn't developing properly. But in the later months, it can be because poor maternal nutrition or very poor health in the mother. They also talk about maternal incompetence, and that's one I really, really hate, because it makes it sound like the mother did something wrong, but it usually means that the cervix has started to open before it should, or the uterus is tilted. But we know that because of this, loss of pregnancy after the first trimester is less common, but we do know that there's a lot of babies that don't get born. Again, why it's important is we look at the stage when that baby is developing from 3 to 8 weeks. That's when the organs are developing. So if you get rubella right up to the 12th week, it can cause all kinds of malformations. So that's why we want pregnant women, we want to make sure that parents know they're getting proper nutrition, that they are being protected from, oops, I have to let somebody in. Okay, somebody's coming in. We want to make sure that they are able to have good health, that we want to make sure that women are not, they're not drinking during their pregnancy, because we know that if you drink during your pregnancy, it affects how your brain develops, it affects how your organ develops. We also know vitamin B is a deficiency is a concern. So one of the things we often think about what happens after we're born that causes problems, but there's a whole bunch that happens before. So one of the things we know, premature, the lungs are growing and ready to function at 36 weeks. Your brain hasn't finished growing, but it can still keep growing from 36 to 40 weeks, even if you, a little bit. So premature birth after 36 weeks rarely causes problems. But earlier than that, there can be learning problems, cognitive problems, and sometimes the lungs aren't ready. We also worry about teratogens. And those are the environmental things that can poison the growing baby. And again, this becomes really important, because one of the things we know is children who are born with challenges put significant stress on people's marriages and put significant stress on the family. So quite often you will see families and marriages fall apart because the demands of the child put so much stress. So trying to prevent some of those things is really important. So the most famous one we know about, where there's been lots and lots of research, is alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. They also call it fetal alcohol syndrome. And it changes the way their head looks. It gives them attention problems, but unlike ADHD, it's not very effective. It doesn't treat it very well. They can have lower IQs, they have reading problems, they're impulsive, and no matter how many times you try to teach them proper behavior, they just don't seem to remember it. So you may tell them, you need to speak politely to your teacher. So finally they speak politely to their teacher, but they don't kind of generalize and go, oh, I should also speak politely to my pastor. I should also speak politely. So it's like they just don't go and go, if I should do this here, I should also do it here. So these are individuals who continue to have many, many problems. And this just kind of gives you an idea. Their brain is smaller, their nose is flattened, their eyes are very narrow. The space between their eyes is narrower than it should be. Their face is narrower and skinnier than it should be. Their lips aren't formed properly. So there's a lot of physical features of them. We also know, believe it or not, smoking reduces birth weight. It increases your risk of prematurity, and it increases your risk of stillbirth, and it increases rates of learning disability. So again, if you're wanting to decrease the stress in a family, trying not to smoke while you're pregnant is a good one, because then you're not going to have those other problems. We also know that heroin, crystal meth, and cocaine, the baby will be born addicted and will go through withdrawal, and that's going to create huge problems. Okay, I'm trying to see if is Moses in?
Yes, I'm in.
Okay, because I'm trying to see, I can't see your face down there. Okay.
I think
Whoops.
4 minutes, but I'm in.
We also know that if mothers using those drugs, there's a high rate of stillborn and miscarriages. And we also know that things like meth, when children are born to mothers who've been using crystal meth, they can't suck properly. And because you can't suck properly, they can't eat properly. And we know that the babies will have seizures because of the withdrawal. And we also know that some of those children, they're going to have problems learning to speak, and they're going to have problems with their expressive language. What's also scary is we know that when we look at meth in adult users, it also affects their language skills. So some of what we're talking about is starting to understand how what we do before the baby's born has an impact on its intelligence as well. There's also the genetic disorders like autism. Autism is a very severe developmental disorder, and those children don't understand other people's thoughts and feelings. Some of them are completely nonverbal, others of them can speak, but they don't get jokes, and they take everything really literally, and it's very hard for them to listen to complex language. They need repetition and routine, but it's to the extreme, so that if you accidentally move where they always put their clothing, they'll have a meltdown. If the teacher moves the classroom desks around because she wants different students closer to her, they will have a meltdown and they'll get very angry and upset because it's not the way it's supposed to be. They often will, they struggle to deal with sensory input. So if the room is too noisy, they have a meltdown and they get angry and they get upset. If the room is too bright, sometimes if the food doesn't taste right, so they may only eat 2 or 3 different foods, or they'll only wear clothing that is very soft and they're comfortable in. That's a developmental disorder. Some of the other developmental disorders, okay, I gotta let more people in. Okay. So some of the other developmental disorders, and what I'm trying to just go over it quickly, is there are things that lead children to not have the intelligence they need in order to learn. So there's Down syndrome is one of the most famous ones. It's genetic. You've got 3 copies of chromosome 21. There's Cri de chat, which you have a very tiny head. They never learn to speak, and they make these little sounds, and it's called Cri de chat because they sound like little cats. They make these little noises, but that's all they ever learn to make. Prader-Willi syndrome is a fairly famous one because these are people who just can't stop eating, and they're developmentally delayed. So you can't explain to them why they shouldn't eat that much. And the other famous one is Williams syndrome. They're often really good at music, but they really struggle to learn and understand things. They talk a lot. They like to talk, but they talk about the same thing again and again and again. So when children are born into a family and they have these developmental disorders, families need a lot of support. And when Cheryl came with us, she was there, and that's one of the things she was doing, is she was meeting with families and talking about how to support them. And one of the reasons it's important is with children with autism who are able to learn to speak, and children with Down syndrome, children with Prader-Williams, children with Williams syndrome, if we recognize it early enough and we use specialized teaching strategies, like you don't explain it to them in words, you show it to them again and again and again, these children can learn to do a job. They probably can't learn to live completely independently, but they can learn to do chores around the house. They can learn to cook simple meals. But if we don't do that specialized teaching, they don't learn to take care of themselves, and that can become a huge burden on a family, because a child with Down syndrome should be able to learn how to cook simple meals, shower and dress themselves, do chores around the house, and hold down a simple job. But if we don't teach them those things, like they don't learn them just by watching. A normal child can learn those behaviors by watching. Trisomy Down syndrome children, it needs to be taught to them. And if we don't teach it, they become a real burden and a real stress in the family, because they don't know how to do it, and they continue to need lots and lots of care even when they're 25 or 35. Did anybody have a question? One of the things they used to think, sometimes male scientists, I feel like they never talk to mothers, because male scientists used to think that babies couldn't hear or see very well. And babies can see, hear, smell, taste, all of that at birth. They can also pick up their mother's voice from a whole bunch of a whole bunch of other women's voices. They can tell the difference in smell between mother and all other people. What's really cool is at birth, all babies, except for those autistic ones, are primed to learn how to do language, and they babble, but they eventually eliminate the sounds that aren't in the language they always hear. Brain development is really important. It's really important why we stimulate young children. We're born with all the brain cells we'll ever have. And this is why prenatal nutrition is so important. Because if a mother doesn't have enough food, enough folic acid, enough vitamin B, the body has to choose between keeping mom alive and helping the baby grow. And so that baby, if mom is not getting those nutrition, that baby's brain will not be as big when it's born as the neighbor whose mom had good food. So one of the best things we can do to help children develop well is to make sure that mom has access to good nutrition. So finding those things like, and one of the things that's nice is some of the things that are natural in the diet in Zambia are things that are really important for women. So making sure they're eating beans, making sure they're eating the cabbage so that that brain will grow. The other thing we know is that our brain, although the number of cells is the same, the number of connections grow. And this is one of the problems. When you've got fetal alcohol, you're supposed to make connections like this, but since some of the cells are dead, this guy doesn't have anybody to connect to. But we may start off with 2 connections like this, but as our brain grows, it gets more like this. And we have brain growth spurts. And some of the things that help children to have brain growth spurts are talking to them. I used to walk with my daughter on my back all the time. And when I was cleaning the house, I'd be saying, oh, and now I'm putting away this, and now I'm washing the dishes, and now I'm gonna go make some bread. So she heard me talking all the time. And when we played with things, when I had my child, I was still in school, so we did not have a lot of money. So a lot of our toys were, I would give her things wrapped in a piece of fabric. So sometimes I had fuzzy fabric. And sometimes I'd give her something wrapped in a sweater because the sweater would be soft and warm. And sometimes I would give her something that had been wrapped up in the string bag you used to go shopping with. So she was getting all sorts of different sensations. And I would put different colored things in front of her so that she could see them. And sometimes we had this thing, a cord that hung over her bed. And sometimes I hung different colored plastic cups off it. And sometimes I hung spoons off it. So what we were doing is we were trying to give her brain all that stimulation. And I would say it doesn't need to be expensive. It just needs to be vision, hearing, seeing, and language. And every time we see those brain growth spurts, we see kids learn to do things. So sometimes we put children in school, and if they haven't had the right brain growth spurt yet, they're sitting in school going, I'm really not ready to do this. And it's got nothing to do with intelligence. It's got to do with whether or not that part of their brain is developed yet. Language acquisition is one of the things we see in development, and it's really important, obviously. The very first thing children do is they use gestures first. They point, they reach, they grab. And if children don't do that, that's a really serious sign that there's a major developmental problem. In the early stages, kids do a sound called cooing, and it's basically ma, ba, and they make little noises. At first, children make every single sound, but within a few months, they stop to make sounds that don't come from their language. So that's why sometimes learning a language with very different sounds can be really difficult, because your mouth doesn't know how to make those sounds. So there's a kind of sound in Chinese, and it's called a diphthong, and you make the tone of your voice go up and down, and I can't do it. I never learned how to do it as a baby, so it's really hard for me to do it. But some of the things that's really cool, because babies all babble, and I don't know the Zambian language ones, I was looking these up, because babies babble the similar ways. In English, Chinese, and Polish, mama is the word for mother that babies use. In Korean, it's uma, uma, uma. So you see that ma sound happening. And in Zulu, it's umama. I can't say it right, probably, but you can hear it's that baby mama, mama sound. And since babies make the same sounds, a lot of those early words that babies use are the same over different languages. Okay. Whoops, what have I done here? Oh, wait. Okay. Around age 2, the baby has about 50 to 200 words, and then it just grows like crazy. So by age 5, the child understands 6,000 words. One of the things that we need to look at sometimes, because especially here in Canada, we have a lot of English as a second language students. We have a whole bunch of students who come here from other countries. And when we try to work with them, sometimes it looks like they're not as smart. But one of the things that happens is kids learn both languages at the same time, but they don't learn the words, the same words in both languages. So I grew up in a home where my father speaks English, my mother spoke French. Most of the time she spoke in English. But it meant that when it might mean that I know the word cat in English, but I didn't know how to say it in French. So sometimes what we see is little kids, when they're living in a family with 2 languages, they will speak in a mix because they know how to say it in English, but they don't know how to say it in French, or they know how to say it in French, but they don't know how to say it in English. So sometimes you'll ask them the meaning of a simple word, and they'll look at you like, because you've asked for it in the wrong language. But by the time they're teens, our brains are so good at learning languages, they will know both languages. And if you want to learn a second language, learning it when you're a teenager is best. Okay. Anybody have questions? Okay. The thing I want to talk about next is attachment. And I did give you a video you can look at, because attachment is really important in long-term relationships and really important for long-term mental health. Attachment is the ability to form a relationship. It's that long-standing connection between people. And when you see children who have been in an orphanage and then in multiple foster care systems, or you see a child who has had multiple mother figures or multiple parent figures, so they've had, mom has had 5 boyfriends, or dad has had 6 wives. What you see is that child's attachments ability has been impaired because there hasn't been a single adult person they can securely attach to and know they're there, and to feel secure with that. So what we see builds attachment is when the parent, if the child cries, the parent goes to help them. If they're playing with the child, they're smiling at the child, they're meeting their names. If the parent has to leave, when the parent returns, the child greets them warmly. And that's that ability to basically say, I trust you. So that's a secure attachment. But we've also got avoidant attachment. And you see that with parents who are less involved with their children, or they're not consistent in parenting them. So sometimes I'll come over when you're hurt and I'll take care of you, and other times I'll ignore you. And what you see is the parents are less involved, so that they may be there when there is abuse. Resistant, the child is very clingy, but at the same time they're angry, and it's difficult for the parent to comfort them. And that's because they don't trust them, because again, the parent is unpredictable and unreliable. And the last kind of attachment is what we call disorganized. And that's the most concerning one, because these are children who don't count on their parent. They do not go to the parent when the parent leaves, when the parent returns. They get really angry when the parent returns sometimes. So part of the problem is that these are usually, you see this kind of disorganized attachment where the parents are abusive. So the child doesn't feel safe when the parent is there, but they don't feel safe when the parent isn't there. So if you grow up, if your parents are neglectful and abusive, your view of the world becomes, people aren't trustworthy. I can't rely on people. And so when parents are asking those children as teenagers to do things, those teenagers don't want to follow through because they don't trust their parent to be doing what's best for them. So being able to respond to your child consistently. And that doesn't mean that every time your child cries, you go over and rush and help them. But it means you know the cry that means this is serious, and you make sure you always help them. You listen to your child, and you talk to your child, and you spend time with them. People used to talk about quality time. Time doesn't have to be quality time. Just the fact that you're in the kitchen cooking and listening to your child, or cooking while your child does homework, and saying yes, 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 that helps to build attachment. So I've given a link on the PowerPoint where you can go and watch a video that shows the different styles of attachment. And when you're working with a family, quite often when you see the way they're attached, that gives us the direction we need to start saying, how do we work in this family to get the behavior better by working with how the parents are attaching to their child. And again, as I said, oh, okay, yes? You wanted to ask something, no, Moses?
Yeah, I want to ask something here. How will you tell that this kind of a child grew under a disorganized attachment? And maybe what could be some of the quick remedies to try and help out the situation?
Well, what the disorganized attachment usually talks about parents' physical discipline when kids can know it's because I did this thing bad. That doesn't cause the disorganized. But if parents, sometimes I hit you when you are loud and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I hit you because I come home from work and I'm in a bad mood. So what you see with the disorganized child is they don't listen to their parents. If they get hurt, they don't necessarily go to their parents. They tell you things like, no, I don't want to talk to my parents. I don't trust my parents. Their behavior can be very bad at school. They're very unpredictable. Some days they do well, and other days they're screaming and yelling and arguing and fighting with the teacher. So some of it comes down to trying to get the parents to be consistent. Make specific rules and don't be violent with those rules. Make sure that you are praising your child, at least, for when they do something good. But it also comes down to making sure that teachers, when the child is having a good day, they tell him how proud they are of him. They tell him what they did right. Because you see this disorganized when parents are being abusive. So the child doesn't feel safe anywhere. So there's not a quick fix, but what you can do is try, can he feel safe at school? Can he feel safe at church? Is there an older person in the church who will, or the school, who will stop in and make sure the child is doing well? Can we find a friend who he can feel safe at their house so that he knows, even if things are difficult at home, there are people who do care about me? Because basically the disorganized attachment is because the parents aren't trustworthy. And so the quick fix, there isn't one, because we can't suddenly change the parents 100%. But what we're trying to do is teach the child that there are adults you can trust. There are adults who won't hurt you. And does that help?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I'm following.
Yeah, and it is here in schools, many of those children we see with the disorganized attachment have been taken away from a violent family or taken away from a family where the parents were using a lot of drugs. And so what we do is we assign a particular person in the school to be their buddy, so that it may be an older student who, the grade 8 student who meets the grade 1 student at the door every day and walks them to class, so that they know there is somebody here who will care about me. So that's one of the ways we try to work with it here in schools. Okay. The other thing, though, that when we're looking at babies and temperament, some kids are harder to parent than others. Some kids are born more active than others. Some kids are born easier to settle than others. Some kids are more sensitive. I joke about it because my first child, Aiden, did not sleep and was very high need, and was one of those kids who, if she got startled, she'd burst out into tears. There's a reflex you text with babies, and when she did it, she lost it. And so when the doctor went to do it with her, I said, don't do it. She'll get fussy and it'll be hard to settle. So she was a difficult temperament child. My son was also high need, very reactive, lots of sensitivities to food, not a great attention span. So I have always jokingly said that God looked at me and said, if I send her another one like that, she's sending them all back. So I have 2 difficult temperament children, and my youngest one is what I call easy temperament. She doesn't mind new experiences. She slept easily. She adapted to changes. She could sleep anywhere. She was not sensitive. So one of the things is about 40% of babies have an easy temperament. Of course, I get 1 out of 3. Easy babies make parents feel like they're doing a really good job, and that makes it easier to be a good parent, because you're like, I'm doing this well, and you don't get frustrated. But then there's the difficult temperament kids. Mine 2 were definitely difficult temperament, long, difficult crying episodes. So if something upset them, it took a long time to soothe them down. And one of the problems is you can be a great parent and you still have the child tears up. Those kinds of children in a family where there's stress can cause parents to become very angry. They can cause parents to become very frustrated. So helping parents to understand, this isn't your fault. You just have this spirited, feisty kid. You are a good parent. Because one of the things we know that for adults, one of a big stressor is being a poor parent. And if they feel like they're a poor parent, their mood's going to go down and they're going to be poorly. The last group is slow to warm up. These are kids who are kind of in the middle. They can be really reactive, but once they're used to something, they settle in. They're shy, they're sensitive. About 40% of kids, I'll be honest, are kind of in the middle. So my oldest was definitely difficult. My youngest was definitely easy. My middle one would have probably been a mix. But if you can help parents to understand that, it often means that you can help the parent. Okay, there's something on here that says there are 3 people chatting, and I'm on. Oh, Florence has a question. Okay, Florence, I'm going to unmute you for your question. Okay, Florence. Okay, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to stop share for a moment so I can unmute Florence. Okay, Florence, okay.
My question is, what effects does it have if the father is
Okay, wait, I'm going to mute Stephen because I think there's noise in the background there. What effect does,
the father play when in a child disorder if he drinks a lot of alcohol or he takes a lot of alcohol?
well, that won't affect the baby while it's growing in the uterus. But when a father drinks a lot of alcohol, he becomes that unpredictable parent. You don't know whether he will be nice to you. You don't know whether he'll be drunk and angry. So when a father drinks a lot of alcohol, that's when we often see kids with that attachment, that resistant or avoidant attachment, because they are unsure of whether I should be close. So they grow up, and surprisingly enough, because they are resistant or avoidant, they're unsure about forming relationships with other people. So alcoholism has a genetic piece to it, but we also know that people who are uncomfortable in relationships, men will drink because it's a way of dealing with those uncomfortable feelings that I have when I'm in these intimate relationships. I don't want to deal with how I feel. I don't want to deal with that she's making me sad or she's making me angry. I don't want to think about the fact that my wife is angry at me and may leave. So the father who is an alcoholic increases the probability of his children becoming alcoholics, but he also makes it difficult for them to trust, because alcoholics, when you're drinking, you're unpredictable. I mean, people always, when you watch, a lot of times people think about the happy drunk. He's funny, he's laughing, but we forget that a lot of alcoholics are a mean drunk. And if you make too much noise, they'll hit you or yell at you. So since a child doesn't know who he's coming home to, you see that resistant or avoidant attachment. Make sense?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, now I got to go back to sharing. Where were we? Here we are. Okay, so this just lets you see, if you go into the PowerPoint, you'll see the kinds of things they talk about that make a temperament. And it's an easy child is easy for everybody to parent, but a difficult temperament child, they're harder to parent. And so for somebody who is an alcoholic, that becomes a really negative combination. For somebody who was raised by a parent who wasn't available and was inconsistent, they don't know how to handle that difficult child. So you can get these patterns continuing for generations because you're seeing the same difficulties affecting each generation. So helping parents to understand what's natural to the child, what are strategies for using that child. Like if this child really, like Aiden, I realized I had to let her sleep by her routine. It was much less frustrating than trying to get her to go to bed on a routine. But with Nathania, having her on a, this is bedtime, worked really, really well for her. And it wasn't that I became a better parent. And it's really funny because my oldest Aiden has 3 children now, and her first child was the easy child. So she talked about, no, it works because I'm giving her a really strong routine. And then she had Reese. And Reese is a slow to warm up child. And all of a sudden she realized that when she put Reese down at bedtime, Reese may or may not fall asleep. And fortunately, because she'd had an easy child, she could realize this isn't me being a bad parent, and she didn't get angry at Reese. She realized Reese is different and I need to change the way I parent a little bit, even though she really likes to have a routine now. Okay, what have I done wrong? I've lost my mouse, so, oh, there it is. There it is. So now I can change the page. We also look at parenting style. What's kind of interesting when we look at parenting styles is in North America, they're often fairly judgmental about some of the styles, but what we know is that different cultures use different parenting styles, but the parenting style interacts with temperament, and what we're doing is how we parent helps our child to develop a self-concept. And what we want from development is that child to grow up and see themselves as competent, socially skilled, likable, and able to make good decisions and being capable. Because if I feel that way, I'm not going to spend a lot of time getting drunk. If I feel that way, I'm going to go out and look for work. If I feel that way, I'm going to make friends, form a relationship, and be a good father or mother. So the different types of styles. There's the authoritative style, and there are consistent rules and limits. And, you know, this is the way we do it in our family. But those rules change as the child gets older. As the child gets older, they start to say, you have the right to stay out later at night, but that's only if you get your homework done and you finish your chores. The children are allowed to make more decisions as they get older. So you're right. You earned this money. You can decide if you want to buy school books with it or whether you want to get some new clothes for your uniform. So they're letting them make more decisions because they've been teaching them why we have these rules. They'll also, parents who are authoritative can modify the rules for the situation. So bedtime is 9 o'clock, but we're at a family wedding and it's going on till 11 o'clock at night. So we'll let the children stay up late. They express warmth and affection. They tell their children they're proud of them for following the rules, and they have reasons for the rules. Now, the authoritarian is much more focused on obedience, compliance, and following the rules, and it takes much longer for the rules to change. And in cultures that which prefer authoritarian, it's not necessarily bad, but in an authoritarian one, even when the children grow up, parents often retain an important role in decision making. So even when the child's an adult, they may phone up and say, well, I'm thinking of changing my job. And the parent would give them, have a say and input into it. So it's kind of difficult because I grew up in Canada, but I come from my father's culture is not as permissive as some of the cultures here. So I would call my father to say things like, when I was at university, I'm planning to change my major. Is that all right? Do you think it's okay if I change from chemistry to psychology? So it's not a bad one, but for some people, because my dad always, when he never told me what to do, but he would end up discussing with me what he thought the different options were. But sometimes authoritarian parents will make all the decisions and they may not explain why the rules are in place. And if they don't explain the why of the rules, children can often grow up anxious and unsure because they don't know why the rules, so they don't know how to make the decisions when they're on their own and their parent isn't there to tell them. So it's really important if you're being authoritarian and saying, this is the way we do it, and here is why. So this is what you should do when you go to this place because of that. So understanding why, because otherwise you can get, if people don't understand the why of rules when children are growing up and they just follow the rules, when they get in new situations, they don't know how to behave and they will follow whatever anybody tells them to do. So if they have grown up believing whatever dad tells me to do is what I do, and they don't know why, and then they meet a man who is a criminal and he's older than them and he starts bossing them around, they may not know how to say, no, I don't listen to you because my father told me that we have these rules for this reason. So it is really important for kids, if you're using this style, that you explain why the rules are. Now, one of the things that's important to know is abusive parents are often authoritarian because they basically go, this is the rule, and if you don't do it my way, I'm going to punish you. But most authoritarian parents are not abusive, but it's because that's the style of parenting that abusive parents come out of. A lot of people are judgmental about it, but I think it's really important we remember, just because that's the kind of style that abusive people have, that doesn't mean having that style makes you abusive, because it's a style that works very well for many people, provided, like I say, you help the child learn how to make their own decisions for when you're not around. Permissive parents, there are a lot of issues with permissive parents. A lot of parents seem to like permissive parenting because they want to be their child's friend. and they think they want to be close. So they don't want to set rules. They don't want their parents, their children to think that they're bossing them around. So they tend not to have a lot of rules. So they think their kids will learn from their own mistakes. But the problem is the mistakes these children make can lead them into really poor behavior. So there's a lack of self-discipline. They struggle to follow rules in other situations like school. They get poorer grades. These are the kids who find it harder to say no to drugs and alcohol. Authoritative parents, kids are often very good at saying no to drugs and alcohol because they know why they should say no. Authoritarian, it's a mix. Sometimes the kids are very good at saying no to drugs and alcohol because the parents have been very good at explaining why, but kids from authoritarian parents may be more likely to rebel. And again, I'm going to go back to it. That's why we have to talk about why we have the rules. If we don't say why, children tend to get into misbehavior because when they get into a difficult situation, they can't figure it out from themselves. Kids with permissive parents, though, tend to have higher self-esteem because their parents think they're wonderful. They tend to have better social skills because parents spend more time hanging out with them as a friend, and they're less likely to be depressed. So there are some positives. Uninvolved parents are basically, we see that, oh, yes, Moses. Okay, I have to stop sharing. And, okay, I'm trying to unmute you. Okay, I can't see. You're gonna have to unmute. Oh, good. Yes, Moses.
Unmuted. I wanted to find out on does culture also come in the types of parenting, because the African setup, I think most of it is just authoritative.
Yeah.
You have to do this. This is my way as your parent. This is what I want, and
Yeah.
if you can't do what I want, then
Yes.
you know. So does culture also come in I think most of the Western culture, I want to think that is permissive.
No.
Children are more free to make their decisions.
Yeah.
And what, so does culture come in also the kinds of parenting?
Yes.
Culture plays more.
Yeah.
Yes.
Authoritative is common in North America. Permissive parenting is more common in Europe and North America. Authoritarian parenting is more common with Asian communities and African. But like I said, one of the things when we look at positive outcomes from authoritarian and negative outcomes from authoritarian parents who explain why have much more positive outcomes than authoritarian parents who say, do what I say, but I'm not going to explain to you why. So,
okay.
So definitely, I would say my family background, which is French Canadian, my father's English and Rom, he was my mother was more permissive, but that's because my mother had her own issues. My father was somewhere between authoritarian and authoritative. So he would always discuss with me why. So, okay, this is the one that came as a real shock to me. When I was in university, my friend Jane moved in with her boyfriend, Courtney. Now, her boyfriend, Courtney, and she are married now. They've been married for 35 years. We're going to their son's wedding next week or next month. But when Jane moved in with her boyfriend, her father said, well, okay, you can pay for your own school now. And Jane was like, this is ridiculous. My dad should be paying my way through university. And I'm like, Jane, you're living with a man. That's like being married. If I moved in with a man, my father would say to me, you have decided to be an adult. You have decided to take on these adult responsibilities. If you are going to be a grown-up, you are responsible for those grown-up things. But Jane's parents had been much more permissive, which is why I never would have considered living with a man, because my father would have been so. But Jane's family was much more permissive. So you're right, permissive is much more common in Western and North American, but there's also a lot of authoritarian and authoritative. And that's why I say there's nothing bad about them, but if you want your best outcome, you explain why the rules so that when your child gets in a situation without you present, they can figure out what to do. If they only know the rules and not the why, they can be in a situation going, I don't know what to do, so they just follow the strong leader. and that's bad.
Sure.
But definitely, Asian cultures are very authoritarian, because in Asian cultures, even as an adult, you wouldn't make a major decision without consulting with your parents.
That's true.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
So, like I said, it's how you do it. The one though that is pretty clearly negative is the uninvolved parent. Whoops, hang on, I did this wrong. Where'd I go? I needed to share screen and I didn't. The one that is concerning is what we call the uninvolved parent. These are the parent who basically has the baby and then lets them, keeps them alive, but that's about it. And we see that when we've got parents who have serious substance abuse issues, or they have major depression. We also see it here in North America when both parents have high profile, high pressure jobs. So both parents are lawyers, and so they hire a nanny, and they go through a new nanny every 8 months or every year. So we also see it when the parents are separated. And so mom decides it's more important to me to have a new husband than to focus on the children, or the father is saying, no, I don't have time to take the kids. I don't have time for the children to come with me. I'm trying to get a new wife. It also occurs when the parent didn't want a child, so that they became pregnant accidentally. Or when the woman got pregnant and the man didn't want to have the baby. So those children grow up feeling like, I am unwanted. Nobody cared about me. Nobody wants me here. We often see the oldest child in that family acting like a little adult. And these kids, they look really mature, but when they grow up, they have no idea how, because they're taking on the child, caring for the child, but they're not doing it because they love them, because they're not old enough to have those feelings. So when they grow up and they try to get married, they're very controlling. They don't know how to kind of get input. They often don't know how to really love somebody because they've been so focused on just making sure nobody in the family dies. These children are very anxious. They're often emotionally withdrawn. They have few friends. They'll use substances because it's one of the things that make them feel happy. And one of the things that's really scary is those are the children that are really vulnerable to being exploited. Because if my parents don't pay any attention to me, any bad person who is nice to me, I will follow. So these children often get taken advantage of, put into prostitution, because they are so desperate for any type of love and affection. So again, these are the children, if you have them in your school, you try and find an older student who will help them do homework, who will eat lunch with them, who will spend time with them. If they are at the church, you try to bring them into the youth group so that they know the other youth in the youth group care about them. I often will, these are the children, you try to find an adult who will pay attention to them in a healthy way. So if you have a child who really likes animals and is basically, parents are abandoning them, you get them involved with the local, somebody who has a farm, and they can help take care of the animals, because these children are at a lot of risk when their parents really don't care. Okay, oh wait, this is what I've done wrong. I'm sorry about this. So one of the things, this is my way that I talk about setting rules with teenagers. And I always talk about, when we're setting rules with teenagers, sometimes you have to choose your battles, because sometimes you can win your battle but lose the child. So I have 3 things that I used to consider when I would be battling with my children. And this comes out of some research on development. So the first rule is it permanent? If it is permanent, that's a battle I fight. So when my daughter was about 15, she wanted to get what's called an industrial piercing. And they were very trendy and popular about 15, 16 years ago. And when my daughter was about 19, she told me how happy I was that I said no, because an industrial piercing leaves great big holes in the tops of your ears. It's permanent. I said, no, you are not getting that done. It is not allowed. Dyeing her hair, she wore a blue dress for graduation and she wanted to put blue streaks in her hair. She was only 14 years old. And I went, it's not permanent. Her hair will grow out. She can do it. My second question when you're picking whether or not you're going to fight about something is it life-threatening? Drinking and driving is life-threatening, so my children were not allowed to go to parties where people were driving to the party and drinking. Drugs are life-threatening, so I stood firm. You're not allowed to do drugs. Smoking is life-threatening. I stood firm. You are not allowed to have cigarettes as long as you live in this house. So, but other things, you know, I want to go to a pool party. Well, it's not life-threatening. You can go. But the last one, and this one's harder, is it morally threatening? Does this go against the morals and values you hold as a family? So my daughter would swim a lot. And when she went swimming at the pool, she always wore a one-piece bathing suit. Well, one of her friends was having a pool party, and it was just the 5 girls. And so she wanted to wear a bikini. I wouldn't have let her wear a bikini on the beach, but she was going to her girlfriend's house, she could wear a bikini. Another time though, she wanted to go to a party and it was going to be a sleepover party, and I knew because it was being held at a boys' house that there would be boys spending the night as well as girls spending the night. And to me, that was against our moral values. So I said, no, you can't do this. It's against our moral values. So when parents are really struggling with the fights with the kids, I say, when you're fighting with them, is it permanent? Is it life-threatening? Is it morally threatening? And if it's none of those things, it's not a battle worth fighting where you're going to lose the child. And you can then do that reasonable, okay, it's okay because of this, it's this. And so you are teaching them how to think and problem solve so that when they are asked to do something by a friend that is permanent, life-threatening, or morally threatening, they know how to make the decision and say, no, I won't do that. And that was the end of it. And that's the end of Lifespan. So I'm going to stop sharing. And does anybody have any questions? I will unmute everybody. Any questions?
Just a comment.
That was really good, really good. Sorry, go ahead.
Moses?
It was a wonderful session. I really enjoyed. It's really talking about real life situations. Yeah, so
Well,
it was easy.
one of the things I think is really important is psychology is about real life. And remember I said one of the reasons I was excited about this was because of going home. When I went home, I'm quite a bit older than my 2 younger sisters. When I was away at university, my one younger sister was like 11 and the other was 13. So in some ways, they did things to me that were like the kind of things you would do to a parent. So I got married and my husband and I were driving my younger sister to a party. She was 15. And she started pretending that it was going to be a wild party and there was going to be drinking and alcohol and you know, and then she said, oh, and we're gonna go in the hot tub, and I didn't bother to bring a bathing suit. And I knew it was a co-ed party. And I looked at her and I knew she was pushing my buttons because that's what teenagers do to their parents. And even though I wasn't her parent, I was enough older than her that I had done things like changing her diaper and all that. So I looked at her and I said, well, then we better go get condoms because you know what HIV is. And she went, what? What? I said, and she goes, well, I'm on the pill. And I knew she wasn't. I knew by this time she's lying just to get me going. I said, well, you know what? pregnancy we can handle. Ross and I could help you raise a baby. Ross and I could take the baby. I said, but HIV you never recover from. She goes, fine, I'm not going to be doing anything like that tonight. But it was clearly that thing that teenagers do to go, poke, poke, poke. I'm not like you. You can't make me do what? So I decided not to argue the morally threatening one, because she was, but to go with this is life threatening. And she actually listened to me. But I always talk about it in real life because, like I said, doing that thing where they talked about teenagers will push you and kids will want to be, I'm not like you. Realizing that my little sisters were doing that because in their heads, I was already a grown-up while they were still children. So I became one of those people. So it didn't drive me crazy when they did those things. But that's why I think it's really important we link it to real life. And that's why I also think as adults, if we're planning to have children, we need to be aware of the things that are going to make our life so much harder. So drinking alcohol when you're pregnant may decrease your stress level because, oh my God, I've had a rough day. But then you're going to have lifelong stress because your child's going to have problems. Any other questions? I have recorded this. I was smart. So it will go up on the classroom and I will put it up on WhatsApp. And Bonnie, you and I, we need to chat at some point because we need to figure out what's next week's class about. And then I don't know how to change the list on the classroom.
Okay. So stay tuned.
Any other
Thank
questions?
you. I think we'll have some questions as we go through our lessons on our own, because there are certain things which will come up, especially after you have taught.
I do check the email every day. And if there is an email, I will post a note onto the WhatsApp and onto the email to answer the question so everybody sees the answer to the question. I'm sure Bonnie can do the same thing.
Yeah, sounds good. Please ask questions.
Mhm. So is there anything else or should I let people go? Bonnie, if you can stay for a minute so we can chat.
Unrecorded.
Yeah, okay. So if we're done, I'm going to stop the recording.